Welcome to Season 4 of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, where yesterday's dinner is tomorrow's history. If you're a peckish person who is curious about the history of food and drink, then you're in the right place. I'm Sam Bilton, an author of some rather niche books who adores her history and food. And by the end of this podcast, I hope you'll be a fan of food history too. You can see what historical delicacies I'm cooking at the moment on Instagram, Threads or Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. In Season 4, we're going to be immersing ourselves in the fascinating world of fresh water, which as we all know is vital to life. We'll be journeying through the centuries to learn more about the food, drink and medicines water provides, its spiritual significance, discovering how water has been used to prepare and preserve our victuals, and how water has been utilised as a source of power and transportation for the food sector. Some of the topics will be obvious, but as ever, I hope that one or two will be pleasantly surprising. As with earlier seasons of the Comfortably Hungry podcast, the guests will be invited to bring a dish to the season's virtual potluck supper. And we've had some delicious contributions, I can tell you. The paid subscribers to the Comfortably Hungry Substack will also get access to recipes inspired by the topics covered in this season. When we think about water as a method of preservation, our first thought is probably of ice. But long before we harnessed the powers of refrigeration, our ancestors found ingenious ways to use watery terrains to preserve food. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, curious yellowish-white waxen lumps encased in the remnants of wooden containers have been unearthed from Ireland's peat bogs by turf cutters and farmers. Some specimens weigh several kilos. Many are thought to date back thousands of years to the Bronze Age. But what exactly are they, and why are they buried in a bog? To help me answer these questions are Maeve Sikora, Keeper of Irish Antiquities, and Isabella Mulhall, Assistant Keeper of Irish Antiquities from the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. Welcome to the podcast, Maeve and Isabella.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Keeper of Irish Antiquities. Now, that sounds like a fabulous job, sort of thing I would love to do myself. But can you describe exactly what you do for the National Museum of Ireland?
Yeah, so as Keeper of Irish Antiquities, I'm responsible for the management of a team of curators and collection staff who look after the National Archaeological Collection in Ireland. So the National Museum is the state's repository for all artefacts. So anything that's found in the ground without a known owner gets reported to us, and then we would investigate. So if we're talking about bog butter today, it means that many of my colleagues and I will spend our time driving out to various bogs, collecting bog butter, meeting finders, bringing it back, researching it, etc., etc. And then I suppose the last step is making it accessible to the public. So doing things like this, writing about it in an article like Isabella and I have done. So it's a very exciting job.
No, as Maeve said, it's a very exciting, very varied job. You never know who's going to be at the other end of the line reporting a find to you. And as Maeve said, our duty is to ensure that we glean all the information from the find spot, that we record the details of the discovery, the find circumstances. And because of that, our work takes us the length and breadth of the country. And we liaise very closely with finders and bring the objects into the Conservation Department for treatment if necessary. And the objects then form part of the collections, and we have a valuable reserve collection which is accessible to researchers. But we also put objects on display, as you know, and we have a considerable number of loans, both at home and abroad as well, where Irish material is put on display and forms valuable parts of exhibitions, as I said, in this country and further afield.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what bog butter is, let's backtrack a little and discuss why virtually everyone in early Irish society was preoccupied with cows, because this isn't my first foray into the prominence of cows in Ireland. Last season, my listeners may recall that I did a podcast with Kate Ryan and Neil Buttery, and we discussed in particular bloodletting from cows and black puddings. So what is it about cows in Ireland?
Well, there are two main sources, I suppose, for the importance of cows in Ireland. So they're the written sources, the historical sources, so law tracts of the early medieval period. And then we have the physical evidence as well. So in terms of the law tracts, there's a wonderful book written by Fergus Kelly, and it's about early Irish farming. And he has basically looked at all of the law tracts of the 7th and 8th centuries and extracted from them, information about the importance of various things. So he talks an awful lot about the importance of cows, not only for their food, but their value. So they are a unit of value. And there is so much written about everything from cattle raids to the products of cattle. They are of massive importance. And we know this also from the archaeological evidence, both from cattle bones that are excavated from settlement sites, being butchered, etc. And then from what we're talking about today, so dairy products that have incredibly survived down to us to this day. So they are the most important unit of currency in early medieval society in Ireland.
What role did dairy products play then in the Irish diet in the past?
Yeah, so I'll make a start and then Isabella can come in if that's okay. So we've been just talking about the importance of cows in Irish society and, their products. So the dairy products were, made them hugely valuable. Not just, so almost more valuable than the meat factor. So you keep getting milk from a cow. So obviously bog butter is is the main material evidence of this in Ireland in the archaeological record. But we also know from Fergus Kelly's work on early medieval Irish law texts, for example, that there are a huge number of descriptions. So, for example, there are different descriptions of the consistency of milk. People talking about thick milk, yellow milk. We know that it could be diluted with water, and that was drunk. So, milk diluted with water. It was also used to make porridge. And there's also mention of cream, of course, which was then used to make butter, which we're talking about today. And of course, there are about 500 examples of butter found throughout the archaeological records through time in Ireland. So that's not the butter that was consumed. That's just what had been left behind. So it just gives you an idea of how important it was. But there's also things like references to the artifacts that are associated with dairying and churning, so wooden vessels that are found. Butter, for example, was only used in the porridge of high status people. Poor people didn't have access to it, things like that. So we've vast amounts of information from the written sources, and then of course the archaeology backs it up with the actual artifacts.
Yeah, as Maeve said, animal products from cows were extremely important, and we would have collectively referred to those as bón bhíodh, and that's essentially milk, butter, and so forth. So these were hugely important parts of the Irish diet, not just in early medieval times, but much earlier as well, because we have evidence of dairying in the Neolithic period in Ireland. There's work done by Professor Jessica Smith from UCD and others on material culture from the Cage of Fields in North County Mayo. So they have established that the lipids from milk were found on pottery dating to the Neolithic period. So people in North Mayo in the Neolithic period were engaged in dairying practice. So this goes right back for thousands of years. And indeed, Maeve mentioned that we'd over 500 finds of bog butter known from Ireland's bogs. And these are the ones that have been reported or that have appeared in newspapers or that have come into the collections. But there are so many more that may not have been discovered as well. And this deposition of butter in bogs goes right back to the early Bronze Age period. So we're talking about 2500 BC. And this continues for over 4,000 years up to the early modern period. So we're talking about 4,000 years of deposition of the production of butter and its deposition in bogs in Ireland. So that's a phenomenal length of time by any standards.
So why did people bury their butter then? As I actually said at the beginning, when we think of water as a method of preserving, we think of ice. We don't think automatically of burying things in a bog. So why what made them decide to bury their butter?
Well, I think we can safely say that because we're talking about 4,000 years of a practice, we can safely say that it wasn't for the same reason across 4,000 years, for sure,
Okay.
Nonetheless, it's a remarkable phenomenon, as Isabella said, like that you have this kind of practice continuing. So there are a number of theories, and again, archaeology often has lots of theories, and we don't always have all of the answers. But obviously, preservation is one of them. So, preserving butter by placing it in a cold place, that's certainly a likely reason why much of it was deposited. There are ideas that maybe it was around maturing the flavor of the butter, by burying it, and also there are other more interesting in some ways theories that maybe it was to do with ensuring a good production of butter next year. So giving back to the land as a way of hopefully, ensuring a good harvest or a good intake in the following year. So I think it's striking when you look at the evidence. We have a vessel that contained bog butter, and there's 37 kilograms of butter. So this isn't a small amount. This is a massive amount of food. And it's remarkable to think you would bury that with the intention of recovering it and then not recover it,
Well, quite.
Something else going on here. These are very sophisticated societies, so I don't think there are 500 examples of butter that was just, forgotten about or anything like that. I think there's something more complex going on. But as I said, there are likely to be many, many reasons and, possibly differences over time. What is also striking is that you have butter deposited in different containers. So you have wooden containers that are carved, some of them extremely fine and decorated. You also have butters deposited in birch bark containers, and in animal skin as well sometimes. So there's a wide variety of containers as well, but some of the containers are very, very fine. I'm thinking in particular of one that we mentioned in our article about bog butter in Ireland, from Quillard in County Roscommon, and that is decorated it's a triangular vessel, which is unusual in the first instance because it's not easy to carve a vessel in that shape, but it's decorated with this beautiful triquetra on its base. It was filled with butter, and it is a hanging bowl, so it was suspended. So whether the butter and the vessel were contemporary, unfortunately, we don't know because the butter was removed in order to conserve the vessel, and it wasn't retained. It was an older discovery. We wouldn't necessarily have the same practice now, but obviously this is evidence of high status production or deposit of butter.
And Isabella, what is it about bogs that make them particularly suited to preserving butter?
Bogs are remarkable repositories of archaeological, cultural, and environmental information. So information is preserved in bogs that simply would not be preserved on dryland sites. So, for example, organic materials such as textiles, foodstuffs, wooden objects, even manuscripts are preserved in bogs, and they simply wouldn't be preserved on dryland sites. And bogs they're cool, dark, damp, anoxic environments, and so the oxygen that causes bacteria to feed off it and that causes decomposition or biodeterioration simply does not exist in bogs. So bogs are anaerobic environments, and biodeterioration or decomposition of organic remains simply does not occur. Now, there will be some changes to objects and indeed even human remains that are placed in bogs, but generally the form and, the extent and the size of the object generally remains the same over time. So we have huge amounts of material from bogs. We've wooden platters, wooden vessels, manuscripts, we have writing tablets, we have tridents, we have all sorts of utensils, beautiful bowls, and so forth that survive in pristine condition. And as I said, they would not simply survive on dryland sites. So they are remarkable places. And because of that, so many finds have come to light over the years. And we have a very close working relationship with, for example, Board Namona, the state body. And they, of course, now are engaged in large-scale rehabilitation of their bogs. So material is still coming to light during this particular process. But as I said, peat production has stopped. Large-scale peat production has stopped. So we're not seeing the same volume of finds as we would have in previous years. But we are still, nonetheless, taking in finds, sometimes several finds from these bogs on an annual basis.
That's quite phenomenal, really. So what does it do, the bog, to the butter over time?
Sorry. So when butter is deposited in bogs, and Maeve has outlined the various reasons why butter was deposited in bogs. Sometimes for, bogs were used as ancient refrigerators. Sometimes, material was placed in bogs, to enhance its flavor. Sometimes as votive or ritual deposits and so forth. And when the butter is put into the bog, the chemical changes do occur over time, but this would occur in the first 200 years of deposition of the butter. So studies have shown that, a butter dating to the Iron Age has similar composition to a butter dating from the medieval period, simply because those changes occur within the first 200 years of the butter having been deposited in the bog. So we could talk forever about what exactly these changes are in terms of science and so forth, but generally speaking, the form of the butter generally remains the same, as does the vessel, if it is accompanied by a vessel or by a casing, organic casing of some sort, or a basket and so forth. So these generally remain the same over time.
Didn't I read somewhere that's, I don't know whether it was early 20th or late 19th century, someone actually tasted some bog butter that they'd dug up, some archaeologist.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there was a curiosity and a fascination with how things smelled and how things tasted. And, there was an antiquarian who did sample everything that he came across, and he did say it was quite rancid and acid, but the smell is very, very distinctive. If you walk into the stores, you'll know exactly what's in the storage area before you even look at the list. Yeah, because it's quite strong, quite pungent. But Maeve and I are very used to it, so it doesn't bother us in the slightest. But it is quite a noticeably strong smell for somebody coming in to the first time to look at it.
Oh, wow.
And it's remarkable that smell has survived as well, despite the fact that the butter has been deposited in bogs and so forth.
And how long did this practice go on for? So we've talked that it potentially goes back thousands of years, but what's the most recent sample of bog butter that's been found to date in terms of closest to where we are in time now?
So it's probably post-medieval, 18th century, Maeve. I'm just trying to think about an example.
Generally, we would now routinely take a sample of the butter for radiocarbon dating when it comes in. And so there are references to the deposition of butter in the later medieval or post-medieval period, as Isabella said, but often you can't get the sort of accuracy with radiocarbon dating at that later period. But certainly it seems that it was this, as we said, up to, maybe the sort of 18th century, this practice was continued.
As Maeve said, this could have continued up to the 18th, 19th century. And there is a practice of transhumance, or it's known as bowling as well. And that's the seasonal movement of animals up and down the mountainside. And there are bowley huts associated with these people. And oftentimes it was butter that was made in these huts as well, during that period that those people were tending to their animals. And many folklorists have commented on this. Eston Evans, for example, has written about it, about the seasonal movement of animals and the fact that those huts were used in butter making. So the butter would have been stored, in the nearest available spot, in a bog, for example, to keep it cool, to keep it preserved, to enhance its flavour and so forth.
And would they have used it, do you think, themselves? Would they have used stores perhaps from the previous year while they were sort of occupying these huts?
Yes, I'm sure they could have done. I'm not sure, what sort of knowledge they had about how long butter stays preserved in bogs or how long it stays edible. But I'm sure, yes, they would have known where they had buried it and they would have retrieved it. And I'm not sure whether they brought it back down to their homes, in the foot of the mountains at the end of the season or whatever. So so we've a lot of questions. We've answered quite a few, but we've quite a few still remaining. And as to all the possible reasons why butter was.
Yeah, I mean that's the joy of archaeology and history in general, though, isn't it? It's having more questions to answer. That's why we do what we do. You've talked about radiocarbon dating to identify the age of the bog butter. Once it's been excavated, how do you keep it from going off, so to speak?
That's a good question. It's actually quite a stable substance by the time it's discovered most of the time. So our biggest challenge would probably be when there's a vessel that contains the butter and how we treat the two. So wood is, for conservators, our colleagues in that department, the wood and the butter are two separate, different materials, and they require different treatments, if you like. And you'll see this if you come and look at our Kingship and Sacrifice exhibition. You'll see the butter was just cut out of the vessel, and the butter is there and the vessel is there. So they were able to treat the vessel separately. The butter doesn't require any treatment, but it does require special storage place. So there is a particular area in our stores where we keep bog butter separate from other types of material. But now we try and treat the vessel and the butter together, and generally it's around preserving the vessel, which will deteriorate. A wet wooden vessel will dry out, shrink, and lose its form if it's not treated. So there are conservation treatments around. It's basically replacing the water with wax and then freeze drying the object, so that it is there for future generations. And we do use them. We have there's a great museum in Cork called the Butter Museum. It's a small museum in Cork, and they have a wonderful display of butter and butter dairying related equipment. But we're working with them now to loan a number of bog butters to them. So you'll be able to see butters of all different shapes and sizes and ages on display in the Cork Butter Museum soon. So we're going through our stores with our colleagues there and picking the best examples for that. So it's always fun doing something like that and thinking of what stories you can tell from the different examples.
And what do these finds tell us about Irish culinary history?
I suppose very obviously they kind of tell us about the importance of dairying, like we've discussed, Isabella has mentioned as well. The quantities are fascinating because, like I've said, you can have 37 kg of butter in the one vessel, which is just utterly, even carrying something like that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's two of us in the bog, even for smaller vessels. So I think they really underline the fact that, dairying is absolutely of central importance to Irish people, and it has been for a really, really long time.
Yeah, and you're mentioning there the substantial size of some of the butters as well. Some are 35, 37 kg, and that required a huge amount of milk as well. So if you can think about the effort that went into, milking the cows, gathering the milk and so forth. And Maeve and I actually did a study with geneticists and Trinity College on the blending of different milks as well. So we only had a small sample to go from, but we were able to determine that milk from goat, sheep and cows was blended together in some cases to make bog butter. So nothing was wasted. Everything was used. And, even if they blended, that was all right too. It probably gave a very unique taste to the particular butter in question. But, the efforts that were expended were, they were vital and nothing was wasted. We even sometimes see on other vessels from our collections, repairs seen on the vessels, and so nothing was ever cast aside or thrown out. And we talk now about recycling, but they were recycling back in the Iron Age, back in the Bronze Age. They were repairing their vessels, reusing vessels and so forth. And it's the same with the products that they had, whether it was animal bones or, butter, milk, etc. They weren't a wasteful society. They used everything.
I mean, I'm guessing the samples of bog butter, because it was quite a damp environment, they wouldn't have dried out. So I'm guessing the mass would have been pretty similar when it went in. Is that the assumption that, 37 kgs, and maybe it was 40 when it went in the ground, however many hundreds of years later when it's resurrected?
Yeah, exactly. Often it'll expand slightly, so the vessel might have cracked, so.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But only slightly. So generally, it looks and it is the same. I mean, it's something like a kind of a lot of it can be a very crumbly consistency, like Parmesan cheese or something like that. Now, but the size was the size. It's absolutely remarkable to think about that and how many people that would have taken, as Isabella said. And we know that from some of the written sources, this was very much seen as the work of women. So you can imagine the sort of physical labor that goes into something like that too.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. A question I did think to ask about who was making the butter. So it was been women presumably making the butter
There were vessel makers as well mentioned in the sources, so that could have been someone else, a man perhaps carving the vessels, but it seems to have been very much considered a woman's task to make the butter.
And when you find, or when the bog butter is found, is it found in isolation or is it ever found with other artefacts, for example?
That's a really good question too. And I suppose our record is slightly incomplete in some ways because these are always called from someone who's working a peat bog. And typically it's because it's either the colour looks different, so they've noticed straight away that there's something white on the surface of the ground, or else the birds have been in a certain area of the bog and they've noticed that. So the birds are eating the butter effectively. So that's how they're discovered. And we will, as part of our job, investigate all of those sites. And generally speaking, any of the ones I have dealt with anyway, they're found pretty much in isolation. So it's the vessel and the butter gone in on its own. Sometimes there's a stake laying across it, which might have been upright at the time. Perhaps it was just laid across it for another reason. But generally speaking, they're not found, in association with other artifacts.
There might be other artifacts from the same period within the bog, but I mean, a bog could encompass several townlands and it could be very, very vast. So you may get bog butter reported in one section of the bog this year, and there may be maybe a sword from the bog, maybe had been reported 10 years previously, so, but they wouldn't be connected as such. They would be within the one large bog, but not directly connected as such.
So are any other foodstuffs buried in bogs? We've talked about butter, but is there any evidence to suggest that other foodstuffs have been preserved in this manner as well?
So butter is the most common one. And I think, again, it's possibly because of its colour, that it's really noticed. I think if there were random animal bones buried, they're not often either noticed or treated as an artifact because can be in a certain place for loads of different reasons. But there are these lakeland lake dwelling sites in Ireland and in Scotland as well, called crannogs. And often there will be sort of collections of butchered animal bones, recovered from those. So, sometimes interpreted as feasting, perhaps, or just generally as part of life. You're throwing away the meat that you have eaten. But there's nothing. I think bog butter is quite unique in the way it's preserved and in the way it's put in these containers and buried. So it's very unique in that context. But also, as I say, there's probably a bias there in terms of reporting of something like that because it's so unusual looking as well.
You were asking earlier on about the preoccupation with cattle, and Maeve very clearly discussed the mythological tales, the literature and so forth. But just place names is another very important indicator of the importance of cattle and indeed dairying as well. Work by Dr. Martin McConumara has highlighted that many of our place names contain the word butter within them. So, for example, Quil Ima is Killimey, County Laois, and that's the wood of the butter. Gurthan Ima is Butterfield in English, and that there are Butterfield townlands in Dublin and Limerick. Moan the Dubon in County Kilkenny is the bog of the tubs, and that most likely refers to the tubs of bog butter. So, we do get a lot from our place names, and it's vital to look at these place names. And as archaeologists, when we're approaching any archaeological site or we're about to carry out any investigation, I think that it's the place names is what we look at first and foremost, just to see have we any indicators as to the antiquity of the area or what might have happened in the area and so forth. And indeed, the Irish word for road is boher, which derives from the word bow, and bow meaning cow. And the boher was defined by the length and breadth of a cow. So it's interesting that we still use that word in Gaelic, in the Irish language today. So boher is the word. And as I said, bow is cow. So, yeah.
And I'm intrigued now. Have they found bog butter in or near any of the towns with butter associations?
Well, we'd have to probably delve further into that. We could go through our list of butter finds and we'd tell you straight away, if there's any indication. But we'd have to look at it.
I mean, do people know when they dig them up, like farmers? So I know you say it's white, so it obviously looks quite alien, for want of a better word, if you're digging up a terrain. I guess it's quite obvious that it's not something that should be there, but do people generally know that they've dug up an artefact?
They generally do, absolutely. Particularly people that work with Board Namona, the state body, the state peat board, because we have a very close association with those people. We've been working with them for over 60 years in indeed perhaps more, in the National Museum, and we have archaeological liaison officers, on each of the bogs as well. So if somebody finds something, they report it to their nominated archaeological officer in the bog, and then they in turn report it to the National Museum. So there is a very close association with these, and we have a code of practice in place with the Board and Moda workers. So when they were engaged in an extensive peat production, they would report many finds annually. And as I said, they're now rehabilitating many of their bogs in the Irish Midlands. They are no longer engaged in peat production, but they are developing for example, wind farms, solar farms, and so forth. And during all that sort of ground disturbance, of course, there is potential for finds to come to light. And as Maeve indicated, archaeological finds have to be reported to the National Museum of Ireland, because if there's no known owner at the time of discovery, they are automatically deemed state property. So we then, as archaeologists in the National Museum, have an obligation to investigate the find spot, retrieve the find, and so forth. And so, as I said, with Board Namona over the years, we've had many, many reports, and many of the collections from the Board Namona bogs form key exhibits in our exhibitions. They form key parts of many of our exhibitions here in the National Museum of Ireland.
Maeve, what virtual dish will you be contributing to the season's virtual potluck supper?
What I'm going to contribute isn't actually a dish, but it is one of my favourite things to eat, and it does involve butter. So it is Irish soda bread and butter, which is just one of the best snacks that you can have at any time of the day or night. So really fresh soda bread just out of the oven with salted butter on it is a great snack. So that's what I'm going to contribute.
Oh, that sounds lovely. And how about yourself, Isabella?
Well, I'd absolutely be totally in agreement with Maeve. The smell of freshly baked bread. My mother-in-law makes absolutely wonderful bread, and indeed she would have made butter as a young girl herself as well in Achill, County Mayo. But aside from using butter, on bread, butter has so many uses in the Irish diet, and most of the top chefs, will always say, put a bit of butter into whatever you're making, whether it's a sauce or whatever. So I like making nice roux sauces. They're butter-based, and they're so creamy and rich and whatever. And certainly Irish butter can lend itself to so many different, I suppose, meals and so forth. So many dishes. So yeah, maybe a nice roux sauce. And again, you can just add anything to that to flavour it as you see fit to suit the dish that you're making.
Absolutely. And what's next on the horizon for both of you?
Well, for me, Sam, I have we've just opened an exhibition here in Kildare Street in the Museum of Archaeology, and it doesn't feature bog butter, but it does feature many different products of early medieval cows. So we are very excited to have an exhibition of Irish or Irish-related manuscripts that's arrived in a monastery in Switzerland at St. Gallen. Some of them were brought from Ireland to the continent in the 9th century and possibly earlier. So they're manuscripts that are decorated, but they're written on vellum, they're written on calf skin. And we also have an inkhorn in the exhibition. And we also have a leather cover for cattle in that exhibition, but it's a really exciting exhibition that we're sharing with the public until the end of October. So I'm busy we've just brought out a catalogue for that, so I'm just busy with that at the moment.
And Isabella, how about yourself?
Yeah, I'm working mainly on excavation licensing at the minute, so I get to see who's out there excavating, what they're finding, and then one of our roles in the National Museum is to go out and assist at excavations if required, and also to I suppose inspect the finds before they come into to ourselves. So all excavated assemblages come into the National Museum of Ireland. So as Maeve mentioned earlier, the National Museum is the state's repository for all archaeological objects, including objects from excavation. So it's wonderful to hear about what people are excavating right across the country, and it's wonderful to be at the end of the line to hear what discoveries are being made, and it's fascinating. As I said, every day is different. Every day somebody brings up something new that adds to our picture of Irish heritage, and it's a wonderful position to be in the National Museum to hear about all these discoveries, whether they're chance or stray finds, or whether, as I said, they come from archaeological excavation. So we have a privileged role in that sense, and it's one that's fascinating and enlightening, and it's just passionate about it. That's why we're here.
So if someone was to see Bog Butter, is there some on display in the National Museum of Ireland?
Yeah, there's quite a few actually. So there's on the ground floor in our Kingship and Sacrifice exhibition, we have a big keg of bog butter from Rossberry, County Kildare. And then in our medieval gallery, we have 3 or 4 vessels of bog butter. So there's lots of it to see, and we'd love to show it to people. So we're free entry, so free for everybody to come in. So please do come and visit our exhibitions and our bog butter.
And obviously going forward, there'll also be some in Cork at their Butter Museum.
The Butter Museum has lots, and that's a fantastic gem of a museum as well. So I'd really encourage people to visit that one as well on your butter journey in Ireland.
Thank you both for being on the podcast today. Well, I've learnt loads because I'd never heard of bog butter until quite recently. And I will be sure to look up the bog butter samples in the museum when I visit Dublin. And also, I'm going to make an effort to go to the Butter Museum as well, because that sounds right up my street.
Great. It definitely is one to visit. It's brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you to Maeve and Isabella for their fascinating discussion today on bog butter. I'll put links to the National Museum of Ireland and the Butter Museum in the show notes. I'll also include a link to Maeve and Isabella's chapter on the history of bog butter in Irish Food History, a Companion, so that you can read more about these curious discoveries. As International Women's Day is approaching on the 8th of March, next time I will be exploring the life of a remarkable woman who rose from poverty on the streets of Birmingham in the 19th century to become one of the most successful and wealthiest market traders at Covent Garden, all from selling bunches of watercress. I'll be back soon, but until then, keep your appetites keen. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you really loved it, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, as it really will help other listeners discover Comfortably Hungry. Don't forget to pop along to sambilton.com, where you'll find details on my books, which include my latest publication, Much Ado About Cooking, written in collaboration with Shakespeare's Globe. This new cookbook features recipes inspired by the food in the Bard plays and was huge fun to write, so I think it will be right up your street. You may also want to subscribe to the Comfortably Hungry Substack, which includes more detailed notes from the show. You can subscribe for free, but if you become a paid subscriber for £3.50 a month, you'll also get recipes inspired by the topics covered in the show and access to extra content. Alternatively, you can leave me a one-off tip via Ko-fi to show your appreciation. Just click on the relevant link in the show notes. Your support will help fund the research required to produce Comfortably Hungry. It also means that I can avoid including those pesky ads that may interfere with your enjoyment of the podcast. If you have any questions relating to this season's theme, you can leave a comment in the chat section of the Comfortably Hungry Substack page or tag me on social media. Remember, you can find me on Instagram, Threads and Blue Sky at Mrs. Bilton, that's with 2 S's. I'll be plunging back into the liquid world of food and drink history soon, but until then, take care. Comfortably Hungry is research produced and presented by food historian Sam Bilton, with sound mixing and production by Thomas Dinas of the Delicious Legacy podcast. Additional sound effects and music are provided by Zapsplat and Pom5.